Welcome back to the E30 K-Swap build, and this is episode 9, and we last left off with the engine not cranking. So I pulled the starter to see if that was bad, and it's not. Turned out it didn't have a ground on the engine, so now it works. We're going to be gearing up to build the exhaust here, and first up I'm going to be opening up the ECU so I can wire in an analog input for the wideband sensor. The K-Pro unit comes with 2 ribbon cables here, one for analog, one for digital, and we're going to be using analog input 0 for the wideband. A little bit later down the road, we're going to have to set up the digital input as well to have the speed signal coming in, but that'll be next episode. For the actual connection to the wideband controller, I'm going to be using these Deutsch connectors with this cool crimp tool, which I've never used before. So first up, I'm just going to mark the wire to fit the pin and then strip it accordingly. Generally, these connectors are pretty expensive, but you can get a knockoff brand on Amazon for not too much. It comes with a crimper and a bunch of pins and a bunch of sockets. You're supposed to strip just enough wire to fit into the connector plus about a fingernail's thickness, and then you put it into the tool. With the crimps being done, you can pass the pins into the connector, and then there's a little locking piece that goes in afterwards. Now I'm just going to repeat the same process on the ECU side of the connector, being sure to match up the wire colors. Now onto the car side, I'm just going to tap into this auxiliary fuse for a switch power feed into the controller, and we're going to ground it onto the shock tower. With the wiring portion done, it's time to work on the exhaust. First up is fitting these 2-piece headers together, and it was pretty brutal. They really don't want to go, and the bolts they supply are too short, so I bought some longer ones that really helped. But you're still going to need a hammer and a pry bar to get it together, and they're definitely going to leak. I'm going to have to come back here with some exhaust putty or cement to seal these up because it's kind of hard to weld in between in the center. Luckily, fitting them to the motor is actually super easy and you don't need an extra set of hands down below, and it fits in perfect. I needed to mount these to the motor first to see how they're going to mate up with the rest of the exhaust, which is a Synchro Design Works full stainless 2.5-inch setup. I enlisted my buddy Robbie here to help me weld, as he's pretty much a pro. So our first hurdle was fitting the muffler just right, and it didn't really want to go with the body kit, so we had to extend the brackets quite a bit. There was a lot of guessing and checking involved with this process, with fitting it up, painter's tape, Sharpie, cutting, fitting it up, painter's tape, Sharpie, fitting it up, and then finally tacking it. It probably took us 4 hours just to get everything going before we could even start welding. The welding's really the fast part. So Robbie's got a nice fancy Miller machine that we plugged into my dryer so we could run it super hot for his stainless wire. And it worked pretty good. I mean, is it the most beautiful exhaust you've ever seen? I would say yes. This part over here at the downpipe was the most wonky and needed the most filling. We had to make a couple little pie cuts, and we wanted to fit it to this other piece from Synchro Design Works with the bung and the V-band. So it took a couple steps, but it eventually worked together. While the master was at work, I spent my time trying to load the tune onto the car, which kind of worked and kind of didn't. I was able to connect my laptop to the ECU, flash the tune, make some minor changes, and disable various settings like the immobilizer and other things that wouldn't let us start, but the car just didn't want to go. It was cranking and chugging along, sometimes turned over a little bit, but I kept getting an error on the crank sensor. It only seems to want to go if you keep your foot on the gas, so we're going to have to figure out this problem. It was pretty cool to hear it roaring to life and watch the tack move up and down, but there's still a long way to go on this project. Hopefully get these hiccups ironed out pretty soon.